Hello friend, Chris here. I help people cultivate energy, restore balance, and keep the weight off. Today's show, we have a trivia question. Now, trivia questions aren't that popular these days because, well, we have Google, right? So you might want to Google this and fill in the blank. Why am I so? Let me give you 3 different clues here. The first one is, why am I so anxious and depressed? And this is one of the symptoms that you're going to experience when we finally fill out this missing word here. This missing word causes things like anxiousness and depression, and also it causes hungriness and also causes lack of hunger. So if you're always hungry or never hungry, then that is another symptom of this key word here, the trivia that we're playing tonight. And the last and final one is, are you always sick? That is another symptom. And all 3 of these symptoms, I've suffered from them, and I don't know if you ever have, but a lot of my clients suffer from them as well. And I find that it's the most misdiagnosed symptoms. You know, we always look at different things, and unfortunately, sometimes we look at medication to solve these problems, especially anxiety and depression problems, but usually it's a little simpler than that. So let's fill in the blank here. That missing word we're looking for is, why am I so tired? And that is the subject. We're going to wake up to a very important subject, which is sleep. And it's a subject that a lot of people are not really talking about. They're not really focused on. And I think it's because we're focused on so much else in our life. There's so much else going on in our life. And we're not really focused on the non-doing things, because that's what we're doing when we're sleeping. We're not doing anything. And for some of us, that's really difficult to handle actually, taking a time out and letting our body and our nervous system recover. For some of us, we only let our bodies do that for maybe 4 to 6 hours. And you've probably heard this before. I'm not telling you anything new. We need about 7 to 8 hours. And that might be unfathomable for some people to even consider getting that much sleep, that, they just don't have the time in their busy lifestyles for that kind of sleep. But before I get into the 5 biggest things that you can do to help your sleep, I want to give you the sleep story. And it's all about rhythm. And I want to ask you this really, really important question is, do you have rhythm? Because that's what our body and our biology is all about. It all relies on rhythm. And most times we're out of rhythm. We're out of balance. And our biology is always trying to correct that, but we're always trying to manipulate it because we're always trying to get more done in our lives, understandably. But we pay the price when our body biology is out of balance in so many different ways. And some of the most obvious symptoms and the ones that you can really see on people is weight gain. And sometimes the ones that you can't really see unless you really know the person well is the emotional problems like anxiety and depression, and also addiction problems as well, which are sort of behind the surface, but they're still there and they're still crippling for a lot of people. And when it comes down to it, for a lot of these people, a simple solution would be, first and foremost anyways, to look at their sleep. So again, the sleep story is all about rhythm. And let me explain myself here. It's called their circadian rhythm. You've probably heard about it, but let me explain it really simply and briefly for you. So if this is a timeline, and if we were to put some times here, we'll start off with 6 a.m. in the morning, and we'll draw a midpoint here, okay, of 6 p.m. And because the circadian rhythm is a 24-hour cycle, we'll jump right into 6 a.m. the next day over here. So this is the 2 hormones that are synergistically working in opposite measures to control our sleep, to make sure that we get that 7 to 8 hours, which is recommended if you're a human being. If you're a machine, well, hey, maybe you need as much as Donald Trump needs, which apparently he only needs 4 hours. But hey, I want you to be happy and not grumpy and still effective and productive. So let's try to get the 7 to 8, and let's try to understand the 2 hormones that are going to make that possible. The first one is cortisol. You may have heard of this. And a lot of people look at cortisol and they say, well, yeah, that's the stress hormone. That's the bad hormone. That's the hormone that we don't want. But I'll tell you now, we need this hormone. And I've actually started calling it the sleep hormone and not the stress hormone. Yes, it does have a lot to do with stress. It's activated by stress. And yes, we do have a lot of stress in our lifestyles, our North American lifestyles, that is. But this cortisol is imperative when it comes to this sleep-awake cycle that we call the circadian rhythm, which is really identified by the time of day and how much light there is. That second hormone that we're talking about is melatonin. You may have heard of this as well. There's even a supplement that you can take when you're having sleep problems that assists you with getting to bed. And these are the two hormones that, again, work in opposite measures, but synergistically. Let me show you over this time frame of 24 hours in a circadian rhythm from daylight or 6 a.m. So what happens with cortisol is you're going to see a sharp spike, and that spike usually ends around 9 a.m. for most people. And that spike decreases and basically dips down, okay, all the way back until it loops around at 6 a.m. Now the melatonin takes a different pathway here. You'll see that the melatonin ends up being just slightly increased throughout the daytime hours in and around after 6 p.m., okay, when we're supposed to wind down at the end of the day. Then you'll see a sharp dip. And you'll see something that looks more like this up to the 24-hour point or wake time the next day. So as you can see, they run in different patterns and they both have different types of goals for us. The cortisol, what it's trying to do, it's trying to wake us up. This is our wake-up call here at 6 a.m. This is when our body biology is just naturally prone to wake up if we're in balance. And you may have seen that especially when we've got, rid of the daylight savings time and we've got early mornings that have some sunshine, you'll find that you're getting up a little sooner than you would be if it's dark outside. And that's all about the trigger that the light has, okay, on these two different hormones, cortisol and melatonin. So essentially here, the melatonin has to stay low because that's a signal for our body not to wake up. It's to actually wind down and get to bed. And it normally peaks here at about 12 a.m. in the morning. And that's when it's at its lowest. And this is where we're in the deepest of sleep as well. Now, back over here, if we look at this cortisol when we're waking up, if you feel stressful in the morning and maybe a little bit more anxious than you are during the rest of the day, well, that's because of this cortisol. And that's because we're trying to wind up and our body's trying to assist us with that and get on with our day. And you should naturally, after 6 p.m., especially if you're helping yourself by winding down and trying to relax at the end of the day, that you'll naturally just drift into a sleep. So there's a lot of other hormones that are, again, synergistically working this entire time frame here. Growth hormone, for example, testosterone, estrogen, the hunger hormones of ghrelin and leptin. But it's really these two particular hormones that are really critical when it comes to being in sync with this circadian rhythm and making sure that we get the proper sleep that we need. Now, knowing this, what I'd like to do is give you the top 5 sleep tips that I use personally and in hopes of getting you more sleep and having a better immune system, being able to control your hunger throughout the day, also, being able to control your emotions and having better emotional health, being a lot less reactive and responding to situations, especially situations that don't go our way. You'll probably find that all 3 of those symptoms do subside substantially when you get enough sleep the night before. Now, here's the mistake that most people make. If you're used to getting 4 or 6 hours per night, that is your norm and your body has adjusted to that. But that doesn't mean that your body would not respond better to 7 to 8, which is the recommended amount of sleep. It's actually even 8 to 9 if you're really highly active, like an athlete, for example, and it's even higher than that. It's even up to 10 hours if you're an adolescent or a child. So if you were to try to shift into more sleep by perhaps using these top 5 sleep tricks or tips that I have for you today, then you'll actually adjust to more sleep and you'll end up seeing more benefits if you give it that time of adaptation and know that it's going to take a few nights before you get better. It's going to get worse before you get better in that sense. So give that a shot, but more particularly, try this. The top one thing that I have for sleep tips right now is what I call the kill switch. And that means hit the lights, hit all the electronic devices that could distract you, because that's typically what's distracting us. It's our cell phones, it's our iPads, it's our TVs, it's the lights, it's anything that is going to interfere with us winding down and letting those two hormones do their job, where cortisol will take that dip and along with the melatonin and allow for that sleep to commence. So making sure that if you're going to be doing any reading, for example, it's not going to be on an electronic device. And if it's going to be TV, then it's going to be a little bit of TV, but you're not going to be end up watching an entire movie, for example, because that's just going to interrupt your sleep. The other thing I want to talk about, speaking of reading, is reading and journaling. That is the second tip that I have for you. Now, with reading, I don't know about you, but I usually get through just about a few pages of my book, whatever I'm reading, and I'll end up falling asleep. That's how good a job reading does for allowing me to relax and to wind down. So depending on the literature, what you're reading, if maybe if it's a sci-fi, if it's a thriller, that might not be the right reading material. Maybe it's going to have to be something that you find very boring. Maybe it's National Geographic. I don't know, but pick the right literature, okay, to make sure that you do get bored quickly and you do get tired and commence into sleep. Now, the journaling is something that I really recommend, especially if you've had a really hard day. And along with this video, there will be a link there, and a free book is what I'm offering, my free book today, The All-Inclusive Diet, along with all the free downloads for the material and all the exercises that are in the book. And one of them is the 5-minute journal, something a friend of mine developed, and it's incredible in the sense that it has an evening journaling component, and it's essentially a gratitude journal. So it really switches your thinking into positive thoughts before you go to bed, which is really important, because if, again, you've had that rough day, then a lot of those negative thoughts are just revving you up and not allowing you to wind down properly. So again, get that free download with that link and consider doing some journaling. If it's just getting your thoughts out on paper and reflecting on the day and what happened and remembering what happened that went well, and not just focusing on all the negative things, but just getting everything out on paper and expressing yourself. And I call it clearing. It basically clears your mind and allows you to go into that rest state that you need before going into sleep. So the third thing here is late night snacks. Now, a lot of people might be confused why I would be even recommending having any late night snacks at all. Well, first of all, if you ever remember having warm milk and cookies and remembering that soothing feeling that perhaps you had in that good night's sleep, that old sort of maybe wise tale of what mothers used to do for us, or even fathers, then there's some truth in that. There really is. And that's because if your late night snacks are going to be high in tryptophan, okay, or essentially any dairy products, you're going to end up having the results of tryptophan, which is sleepiness. So it's a great amino acid which is found in protein foods primarily, but specifically in dairy foods, also in some fruits like bananas, for example, and also in honey as well. So that would make a really interesting combination, wouldn't it? You've got the dairy, you got the banana, you got the honey. It sort of sounds like a banana split, maybe not. Having a dark room, we know now, knowing the melatonin cycle really relies on light. And when there is light, okay, that is our cue to wake up. And that's when cortisol spikes, all right? And we also know that when there isn't any light, that's when melatonin comes into the picture and really helps us get to sleep. So knowing that, we really want to have a dark room while we're sleeping. We want to avoid any types of electronic devices, even alarm clocks, for example. They emit a lot of light that you would want to avoid, especially if you're already having problems sleeping right now, perhaps having some of those symptoms that we talked about. The other thing is keeping it cool. Now, this is something that you probably wouldn't imagine or even want to do in the first place, trying to have your home or your room a little bit cooler, but that's what's required when you're getting to bed. And the reason being is that our body naturally cools when we get into a sleep state, especially when we go into a deep sleep, okay, which is sort of the midway point in any duration of sleep. Our bodies are definitely a few degrees cooler. Now, we can assist that, okay, and assist the sleeping startup process if we already commence into a cool room. So 68 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is probably about 20 degrees Celsius, that's where you want your room to be. And that will help you get to sleep. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't bundle up. I know that, typically females are a couple of degrees cooler than males just to begin with. So you might want to bundle up on the sheets, but it's more so the outside environment, outside your bed or your blankets. That's where we need the coolness, or 68 degrees to 20 degrees Celsius is where you want it. Keeping things quiet. Now, some white noise, I even know people that use music to help them get to sleep. In fact, before I was shooting this show, I was thinking there hasn't been much change in how to get a good night's sleep. And I remember what my mom did to me, and it really hasn't changed that much. Maybe a warm glass of milk, maybe a good night's story, tuck me in some warm blankets, perhaps a lullaby before I go to bed to sing me off to sleep. Those are really the things that still help us today as adults to get to sleep. Now, perhaps it's going to be different content these days, you know what I mean? And it's not going to be what our mothers were giving us, but it still really is things that we can consider, especially the music, for example, to help us to get to sleep, or any other type of white noise that just gives us that feeling of security and allows us to fall asleep. The fifth thing is, tell me in the morning, or let me sleep on it. And I really practice this one, and it's not easy sometimes. What I mean by this is, if you've had a terrible day and there's been perhaps a lot of trauma in your day and a lot of problems that you were faced with and had to solve, and perhaps a lot of that mess wasn't cleaned up, and you've still brought it home with you, and you've actually brought it into bed with you. What I typically do is I don't try to solve those problems. I actually sleep on it. And I sleep on it because I know that my mental alertness is always going to be the highest, because I am in rhythm. I'm within my circadian rhythm. I get my 7 to 8 hours of sleep, or at least I attempt to do that every night. So I know that I'm more mentally cognitive, active, and just smarter in the morning. So I will wait till the morning to deal with that problem and to sort it out, and it works like a charm. And I've tried it the other way as well. I've tried to sort things out and go to the grindstone when I'm already completely defeated and exhausted with dealing perhaps with the problem for an entire day, and nothing really happens. And then the lights go on. I mean, like the lights go on in my head in the morning, and I'm able to solve it. So sleep on it. It's a paradoxical kind of advice, because of course we want answers, we want them now. And we think perhaps wasting a night of sleep would not be able to solve that problem, but this is where our subconscious comes in. And when we put a seed, maybe it's a problem that we need solved, for example, into our subconscious, it's working as we're sleeping. It truly is. It's magical. They've done lots of studies on reading literature before you go to bed, for example. Students that need to study and need to remember things on a test the next day, and their scores are substantially higher when they're studying right before they go to bed. And what ends up happening is, if you've heard of REM, or rapid eye movement sleep, it's a type of sleep that is a dream state, but also it's a file storage state. So what happens in this stage is, everything that we've collected, all that information that really can't be held on to. It's like a computer with RAM, you know, it's the memory for right now or for that particular day, but it needs to be stored away into the hard drive, so to speak. And that's what happens with REM sleep. So it's a really cool thing that we can collect all that information. And as long as we get into REM sleep within X amount of hours or within that day, odds are we will remember a lot of that information. So that's food for thought when it comes to increasing your cognitive skills, your memory skills, and just generally being smarter and solving a lot of perhaps life's problems. So I'm going to leave you with this here. Always know that sleep is not a privilege, okay? Sleep is really a priority. And when you're having any of these symptoms, if it's going to be health symptoms or emotional symptoms and life just seems really out of whack, out of balance, I really want you to look at your sleep. And if that means logging in, if it means getting one of these devices, an activity device that also tracks sleep and leaving it on while you go to bed and just figuring out how you feel when you get 6 hours. How do you feel when you get 2 hours? How do you feel when you get 8 hours? And start focusing and asking yourself these questions. And just see the restorative benefits of sleep with your health, with your relationships, and with your career as well. Until the next time, my friend, inspire to aspire.